Hey there, everybody. It's Matt from the Literary Gamers coming to you with a different video than I usually do. First off, this video is going to be a little weird. I'm actually recording with an iPad for the first time ever, and with a new microphone that hopefully won't be as problematic as the other ones we've had. That being said, I'm looking in weird directions because I'm not sure what to look at while I'm recording on the iPad. So if you're wondering the whole time, where's he looking? Um, right right about there. That's where I'm looking. I'm trying to find the right place. I think right here. If I can stare in that corner, right there, I'm good. Okay. So Jen's been doing some book reviews past few weeks, and I thought I'd throw my hat into the ring. Years ago, I had another channel called Alpha the Eagle. I don't really do much with it anymore. The internet connectivity here at the house is very slow, and it usually took 5 to 6 hours for video to upload. And I don't know what that says about our internet, or maybe I just jabber on too long. But I wanted to kind of go back and do a redo on some of these old book reviews I did because I read some of these books ages ago. And the first book we're going to talk about today, mainly I'll be doing fantasy books. That's going to be my big draw right here because it's really what I'm reading a lot. I used to read a lot of history. Now I'm reading fantasy. But the first book we're going to talk about today is, I'm going to try to get this in screen, back up a little bit, Terry Goodkind's Wizard's First Rule. This is the first book in the series of The Sword of Truth. Now, the reason I'm reviewing this book is because I'm finishing up the last official book in the series. For those of you who don't know, Sword of Truth was originally 11 books with a very small novella prequel in the middle of it. And then Goodkind decided to go back to the series and write what he called the Richard and Kaelin series, which was 4 books, also with a prequel. And we'll talk about that prequel when we get there. And then once that was done, he decided to do a spin-off series called the Nikki Chronicles, and that was 4 books. And then he also wrote 5 short novellas called The Children of Tahara, which extends the series even more. And some of those books are so short they were able to compile the whole thing into one book. And then we have a book called The Law of Nines, which is one I haven't read. It doesn't exist in his fantasy world, but there's a lot of Easter eggs throughout the text that talk about what happens in the Sword of Truth. But for today, I'm just going to read. We'd be here forever. Look how long this book is. I'm going to review Wizard's First Rule, and I'm going to review it as I'm looking at it today versus when I looked at it back then. I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of what happens in the book, and then I'll talk about my thoughts and then my thoughts now, because you'll notice my opinions have changed about a lot of this. So, let's get on with it, shall we? So, Wizard's First Rule was, like I said, one of the most interesting books I read when I first read it in 2015. 2015 was when I read it, because I hadn't read a lot of fantasy. The only fantasy I'd ever read was Tolkien. I read some Chronicles of Narnia, but overall Tolkien was what I read. And I tried reading some other fantasy books, but I just couldn't get into any of them. You know, I grew up a huge Star Wars nerd. I tried reading Game of Thrones when I was like 18, couldn't get into it. And I just realized then it's going to take time for some of that to happen. So when I went back to fantasy, I had actually started with Sapkowski's The Last Wish, The Witcher short story collection, the first one he did, which is what the TV show is based on. Oh, excuse me. And then I jumped into Wizard's First Rule. My wife Jen had it at the library, so she brought it home for me. And I was actually very interested in what was happening here. And so it's a story about and you'll notice it's very cliched now, but a story about I won't want to call him a farmer. He's just kind of like a regular guy who meets up with a woman who she calls herself a confessor. He doesn't know that yet. And he has been revealed to be someone called the Seeker of Truth. And he wields the Sword of Truth, which is where we get the title of the series from. He then takes the sword along with the confessor, and he has adventures with the wizard Zed, not all at the same time, and they're trying to go and rid the world of someone named Darken Rahl. Richard, your main character, has been prophesied to be the one to destroy Darkenrahl. Kaelin, the Confessor, is there to help him, and they both begin to have a very strong friendship that morphs into a romantic interest. There's some elements of forbidden love that go on here. This is very much what I would consider a romantic fantasy book. Richard gets captured halfway through by the forces of Darkenrahl, but in the end, he's able to overcome all that, and the book concludes. This is definitely what I would consider a first book with a question mark. And what I mean by that is I'm not sure, and I'll never know, because if you're not aware, Terry Goodkind passed away last year. So I'm not sure if after Wizard's First Rule there was a plan to continue. There were a few story points that you can tell would lead into other books, but overall, Wizard's First Rule felt very much like a closure. Like, spoilers. I'm sorry, this whole review is going to be full of spoilers, and I'll probably have that put in the description for the video. This whole book, it seems very contained, and there's a lot of really interesting characters in there. And back when I first read it, I thought it was fantastic, and I kept going with the series, so much so that I wanted to run out to the bookstore as soon as I finished the first one and read the next book. As time has, so back then I rated it 4 out of 5 stars, because even though I thought it was really great, I felt it was missing something. So that's also when I discovered that, and this was not the version I read out of, but that there was a TV show called Legend of the Seeker that had aired, and it was, I'm going to be kind here, loosely based on Sword of Truth. I might hold it up here so you can see it. Whoop, whoop, there we go. Like I said, still getting used to this. The basis for the new television series. It's a lot of times you see when these books have their movie tie-ins, it's not, it's always based on the book by. This is the first time I've ever seen the term the basis for the new television series, because it really is very thin when it comes to it. The names are correct, the idea of the show is correct, but the show really deviates, and it kind of has, like, I don't want to call it a Monster of the Week style, but it has an Adventure of the Week style. The best episodes from the show are the ones that tie directly into the source material, so why they decided to go that route, I don't know. But I can say that the book and the TV show, while a lot of die-hard Sword of Truth fans will say that the TV show was just awful, if you can separate the TV show from the book, they both have different stories. And at the end of the review, I'm going to talk about what I think about the show compared to the book. Since this is also my first time recording on an iPad, I am balancing the iPad on the table, and we might get some shakiness. So I'm sorry about that. I hope it doesn't make you sick. This review is meant more to be an audio thing than an actual visual thing. Anyway, so let's get to my current thoughts. Back in the day, I gave this 4 stars. I would probably still say it stays the same with an asterisk, and this is a big one. First off, Goodreads does not let me rate at half stars. I wish it did. If there's one big complaint I had, I really wanted it to have a half-star rating, because this might get 3.5 nowadays. The main criticism of Wizard's First Rule when it came out was that it was very basic, very generic. It was fantasy at its purest form, very Arthurian. Arthurian is the word a lot of reviewers threw around concerning this book. But you have to kind of take that nowadays with a grain of salt, because the book was printed in, I'm going to get this date right, 1994. So it's going to be 20 years old in a few years. And, some things can be excused. But Terry Goodkind does kind of, oh, that's my phone, I'm sorry. Let me turn that speaker off. Sorry, my ringer off. Terry Goodkind does kind of straddle the line between paying homage and sometimes ripping off. And I feel really bad saying that, because I don't really know him personally. He passed away. He can't speak in his own defense. So I wouldn't say ripping off. He pays homage very heavily, I think is the best way I want to say this. A lot of people compare Wizard's First Rule as maybe the pseudo version of Wheel of Time. I don't see it. And I can actually go through and do Wheel of Time again. Wheel of Time had a lot of things going for it, for the fact that Robert Jordan knew that he was going to be writing at least 6 books. He had that already set up before the first one came out. 6 books became 12, became 14, and so on and so forth. So the journey of the Wheel of Time is quite something. Looking back on it now, and having written a fantasy series myself from beginning to end, I can see where people would have criticisms with this book. For example, while Terry Goodkind does write his female protagonists in a very strong light, Kaelin as a confessor is very strong through the series, she does have a difficult time growing in this book, difficult time with character development. For most of the time, she's very reserved, she's very kind of doe-eyed in certain aspects of it. So when the romance starts, she kind of abandons the friendship idea and goes whole hog into the romance, and kind of comes off as a little sophomoric. And also another concern and criticism I have with some of the romance in Wheel of Time. We'll get to that. Anyway, but by the time you see Kaelin really in her first authoritative position, I would say that's when things really change for me in my opinion of her. And it's halfway through the book. And she becomes kind of, instead of just this confessor, which you know very little about to start out with, she becomes basically almost, like I said, an authoritative powerhouse. So there's that criticism that Kaelin takes a little too long to develop. I do think Richard is too perfect in some regards, and you'll hear me say that continually through the series. Richard's a little too perfect. He's a little of everything too. Darkenral to me is evil, but he's not pseudo evil. Not pseudo evil. What am I going for here? He's not like the ultimate evil. You could tell that this was basically dipping his toes into the pond when creating villains, as far as Goodkind goes. Darkenral is more, I would say, perverse, I think is the word I'm looking for, than he is evil. You can get the idea that there is some suffering going on in the world with him in charge of that area, but it doesn't really come forth in some sections. Like sometimes it's just, you know, they're walking around in the woods and they're trying to remain unseen, and that's all great. That's great time for character development. But we really don't see a heck of a lot of the strife that Darkenral is bringing to the world. We hear about it, but we don't really see it. That's something that I think is fixed more in other books, and we'll talk about that in the next one. Not this one today. So the scenes where Richard is captured and tortured by the Mord Sith, the scenes, it's going to turn a lot of people off. If you haven't read Wizard's First Rule and you don't know anything about Goodkind's universe, the scenes with Denna, they're rough. They're rough. They're a little too BDSM for some people. So if you're not into that stuff, you're not going to be looking forward to that section of the book. You know, if you love that kind of stuff, by all means, go for it. But if you don't love that kind of thing, you can probably find ways to get like a condensed version of what happens there online. Someone once told me, when you write scenes like that, it says a lot about you as an author. Ooh. So anyway, Wizard's First Rule, I would still recommend it for new fantasy readers. And I say that because if you've read enough fantasy, you're never going to read Wizard's First Rule. Now, some people might see that as a positive. Some people might see it as a negative. I think you should at least give it a shot. If it's for you, it's for you. If I'm talking about the strengths of the novel, first off, actually the story is fairly solid. There's very few what I would consider major plot holes popping up. And the ones that do pop up are ones that might be fixed later down the line. So I do appreciate that. Goodkind's dialogue is great. I think that the way that Richard and Kaelin interact with each other is good. I think the way that Zed kind of gets into the story is good. Kind of the back and forths with Denna and Richard are all good. and all believable. You really kind of feel like these people aren't acting to be in a fantasy setting. They really are. They really feel like people. They're not these constructs of an author's mind. They feel real. So I will give him that. His dialogue is fantastic, and his story flows properly, I would say. I would hope so for all these pages, that the story flows properly. So that's my thoughts on Wizard's First Rule. I give it 3.5 stars, 4 stars. Like I said, I wish Goodreads could give me a half-star option. In what I do, whenever it's a half a star, I always round up to Goodreads because that's just what I do. To talk about the show, so the image on the front cover of the book is promotional material for the show. If you haven't seen the show and you've read Goodkind, at least check out the first episode. That's all I'll say. And if you're interested, you can keep going. And if you're watching it on a DVD, it's the first episode or the first 2 episodes. I originally watched it on Hulu when everything was put in. So it was the initial premiere was the first 2 episodes, but on DVD it's one after the other. And that's, I think, the main way you can watch it nowadays is on DVD. I'm not sure which streaming platform has it. I know you can rent it on Amazon Prime, but I'm not entirely sure which platform has it. Now, that being said, I actually like the TV show, and let me explain. First off, I'm a sucker for fantasy shows that pulled it off before Game of Thrones. And Legend of the Seeker is one of them. Some people said, there was an article about how when you're missing Game of Thrones, watch these fantasy shows, and someone mentioned Legend of the Seeker, and one person responded, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. I don't think so. When you think pre-Game of Thrones, when fantasy wasn't seen as a viable option for television, this show wasn't half bad. It has some bad acting, it has some bad music, it has some iffy set design. I mean, we're talking about original series Star Trek set design here. But I loved it. I loved every bit of it. Even when the acting's terrible, I still love it. There are those shows out there, and they have their following, and people do enjoy the show. It only got 2 seasons. For a while, there was a fight for a third, but it never happened, and most of the actors have basically moved on now. Why do I like it, and why do I like the book? The book, the problem with adaptation is, if I'm watching a show based off of a book I've read, I kind of know where the show's going to go if it adapts it well. They changed so many things with Legend of the Seeker that I kind of love the fact that I didn't know what was going to happen next. And that's why I think I've kept up with it. It has some parts of the story elements, yes, but I think the best part of it was that it was so different. So different from the book that I could sit there and enjoy the ride. And I think that's all we can really ask for. So, the comments below. Have you read Wizard's First Rule? What do you think of it? Remember, be kind. If you haven't read it, would you consider reading it after this very basic review? I don't go into too many details because I don't want to spoil it for everyone. I just want to give you an idea of what to look for and what kind of things you're going to be reading. This is high fantasy. There's dragons. There's magic swords. There's evil people. Yay. All that sort of stuff. What I would call great early 90s fantasy. The genre has definitely moved forward since then, but this actually was one of the reasons that inspired me to write my own fantasy book. And while some people might poo-poo on it, for me it meant a lot. And I'm going to go into another review of why fantasy is so important to me nowadays. Anyway, that's the review for Wizard's First Rule. Don't forget, hit that thumbs up button if you liked the video. Consider subscribing. We're trying to get on the road to 1,000. We're at 455 as of this morning, so we're almost halfway there. If we get to 500, we're going to give away 3 copies of the first book in my series called The Architect, and the book is called On the Edge of Divinity, and that'll be part of a giveaway that we're doing. So go ahead, subscribe, like, make sure the notification bell is on if you don't want all notifications. You got to do things in your settings. I'm not the YouTube guru. I don't know everything. So anyway, that's going to be it for me today. We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.